Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Welcome to Target Prelims 2021. This is the second session for International Relations under our Prelims crash course. In the last class, we had covered more than 30 topics based on current affairs which could be important for your upcoming prelims. Today we have many more topics lined up, very interesting topics to discuss. So if you're finding these initiatives to be useful, please like the video, comment on them, share the videos with your fellow aspirants, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So let's start with today's session and let's look at the first question. The Abraham Accords were signed primarily between Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, USA, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, UAE, US, or Iran, Turkey, Syria. See, to answer this question, we should talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict. This question is related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. You need to be aware of the latest developments that have taken place in the West Asia, North Africa region with regard to the Israel-Palestine issue. See, when Israel became independent in 1948, it was a unilateral declaration of independence. Israel had violated the UN solution, the two-state solution, which was proposed by the United Nations, and it broke the UN law and unilaterally declared independence on its own. So when Israel declared independence, it never allowed the creation of Palestine, because that is what the two-state solution had proposed. Two independent states of Israel and Palestine were supposed to be born simultaneously. Israel would be a Jewish state and Palestine was supposed to be for the Palestinian Muslims. But Israel violated the two-state solution, broke the UN law, and unilaterally declared independence. So when Israel declared independence in 1948, all the Muslim countries in the region, stretching all the way across Middle East and North Africa, they refused to recognize Israel. They immediately declared war against Israel to protect the rights of the Palestinians. And since then, most of these countries in this region, from Middle East to North Africa, they haven't established diplomatic relations with Israel. This would continue for at least 2 decades until the 1970s. Then in 1967, we had the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arab countries. This was the second war which was taking place after the 1948-49 war. In this conflict, in the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel managed to capture the Sinai Peninsula, the Sinai Desert, which you can see over here. This was Egyptian territory. So following this capture of the Sinai Peninsula, Israel gained an upper hand over Egypt. Until then, Egypt was supporting the Palestinian cause and it had not established diplomatic relations with Israel. In fact, none of the countries in this region, from West Asia to North Africa, none of them had established ties with Israel. They hadn't recognized Israel. So now, when Israel occupied the Sinai Desert, it got a leverage over Egypt. This eventually led to the Camp David Accords, which were worked out in 1978 between Egypt and Israel. This accord was mediated by the United States. The US mediated a settlement between Egypt and Israel through the Camp David Accords of 1978. The following year, in 1979, Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty. With this peace treaty, for the first time, a country in this region was recognizing Israel and establishing full-fledged ties with Israel. In return, Israel agreed to return the Sinai Desert, the Sinai Peninsula which had been occupied, back to Egypt. So Egypt became the first Muslim nation in this region to give recognition to Israel and establish full diplomatic relations. Then something similar happened in 1994 with Jordan. Under American pressure, Jordan would also negotiate a peace treaty with Israel and sign this peace treaty in 1994. So this made Jordan the second Arab country to recognize Israel and establish ties with Israel. But after this, none of the other countries had established official ties with Israel. But however, due to the changing geopolitics of the region, a few Muslim countries, especially countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE and the others, they had already fallen under American influence. So Saudi Arabia, UAE and the others, they had already become the allies of the United States with regard to the geopolitics of this region. So unofficially, these countries were dealing with Israel. Saudi Arabia, which is seen as the leader of the Sunni world, right? It had strongly supported the Palestinian cause. Even today, publicly, Saudi Arabia doesn't recognize Israel. But behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia had established these unofficial ties with Israel. This was again because of US mediation. So, as time progressed, as we entered the 1990s, US rivalry with Iran started rising. Right? Iran is a Shia power, represents the Shia power bloc. Israel has intense rivalry with Iran because Iran doesn't recognize Israel and it has sworn to wipe out Israel. Iran and Saudi Arabia have intense rivalry because Saudi Arabia represents the Sunni power bloc and Iran represents the Shia power bloc. So this rivalry brought US, Israel, Saudi Arabia together to oppose Iran. So this region became a hotbed of covert activities where Iran would target US, Israel and Saudi Arabia and vice versa. So of late attempts have been made to isolate Iran in the region and attempts have been made to give more recognition to Israel in order to bring more countries under the American influence. So last year there was a very big development, a major development took place. Something known as the Abraham Accords were negotiated and this was again mediated by the US. Just like Egypt was made to recognize Israel, just like Jordan was made to recognize Israel, similarly the United Arab Emirates became the third Arab country to recognize Israel with the signing of the Abraham Accords. This negotiation was mediated by the then Donald Trump administration. The then US President Donald Trump played a direct role in mediating these accords. This was seen as a historic development. This couldn't have happened without the approval of Saudi Arabia. Even today, Saudi Arabia doesn't have official ties with Israel. Publicly, it doesn't recognize Israel. But Israel, Saudi Arabia, US are on the same side. They're on the same page when it comes to isolating Iran in the region. So with the approval of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates went ahead, signed the Abraham Accords between US, Israel and the UAE. Through this, Israel was given recognition and UAE and Israel established official diplomatic ties. This was seen as a landmark development because one of the major powers in the region, a Muslim country in the Arab region, was giving recognition to Israel. So this was seen as a big victory for the cause of Israel. This was followed up by the signing of the Abraham Accords by another important country, that is Bahrain. Within a few weeks after UAE recognized Israel, Bahrain followed up and it also signed the Abraham Accords. So today Bahrain and Israel have also established diplomatic relations. Then the very next month, North African countries such as Morocco and the neighbor of Egypt, Sudan, both of them signed their own treaties with Israel and even they would go on to recognize Israel as a legitimate nation. They have established official diplomatic ties with Israel today, thereby strengthening the position of Israel. So these were important developments of the last year. So in the Middle East, North Africa region, 4 major Muslim powers gave recognition to Israel with the mediation of the US. It started with the Abraham Accords signed between US, UAE and Israel. This was followed up by Bahrain, then South Sudan and Morocco. So that is why the topic can be important. So obviously the correct answer is option C. The Abraham Accords were primarily signed between Israel, UAE and the United States. Okay? So let's move on to the second question. Consider the following statements. The United States signs 4 foundational agreements with its key defense partners. India has signed only 3 of them. The Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, or BECA, is the latest agreement signed by India. BECA provides for exchange of logistical support at each other's military bases. See, to answer this question, we should first talk about the four foundational agreements. The United States signs these four foundational agreements with its closest defense partners, with its military allies. For example, with members of the NATO. The NATO is a military alliance that represents the North Atlantic region, right? And the members of NATO are close military allies of the US. So the US expects those countries which have very close defense military relations with the United States to sign these four foundational agreements. By signing these four foundational agreements of the US, the military partner, the other country, will get unprecedented access to US defense military equipment. It will promote interoperability amongst the defense and the military forces. So the closest military allies and defense partners of US have all signed this four foundational agreements. Let's see as to what these agreements are. The first agreement amongst the four foundational agreements is the GSOMIA. It stands for General Security of Military Information Agreement. Under this agreement, US expects the other country to provide for exchange of classified military intelligence. The close military allies of US sign this agreement, and both the sides, that is US and the other partner, they will exchange classified military intelligence with each other. And they also commit to protect this information, the classified information that they are sharing with each other. So this is the first agreement. Now India has also started becoming a close military partner of the US, especially from 2001, right? Especially post 2001, India has become a key defense partner of the US, and in the last few years, we have been procuring several important military platforms and weapons and defense equipment from the United States. Plus, we also conduct many joint exercises, joint operations. So, to further access advanced American military technology and to promote interoperability of forces between the Indian forces and the American forces, India was also expected by the US to sign these four foundational agreements. But in the initial years, there was a lot of hesitance on India's part. India was a little hesitant to sign these agreements, and there was a lot of political opposition as well. Because during the Cold War, India and US had very hostile relations, especially in the 1970s, 1980s and 1990s. India-US relations were very hostile to each other. So, when the Indian government was expected to sign these four foundational agreements by the US, there was a lot of political opposition, there was hesitance on the part of the Indian government as well. India was worried that this could compromise our sovereignty, it could compromise our military secrets. But gradually over a period of time, India has become closer to the US, the trust in the relationship has grown in the last 2 decades, and one after the other, we have signed all the four foundational agreements. We started with the General Security of Military Information Agreement, which we signed in the year 2002. Like I said, it provides for the exchange of military intelligence, military information, classified information, and both the sides are committed to protect that as well. So this will improve the interoperability of forces. It will enable the two countries to conduct joint operations if required. The second such agreement is LEMOA. It stands for Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement. As the name itself indicates, by signing this agreement, you agree to exchange logistical support. It means that if India signs LEMOA with the US, Indian military vessels, our military naval ships, our aircrafts, they can access logistical support at American military bases. They can get resupplies, refueling, they can get servicing done. And this is a reciprocal relationship. Similarly, the American Navy, the US Air Force, will gain access to Indian military facilities where they can request logistical support. They can request refueling, resupplies, etc. This will enhance the operational reach of the armed forces of both the countries. When the US armed forces are deployed in the Indian Ocean, they can seek logistical support from India to expand their operational reach. Similarly, India would get the same treatment if India is deploying its aircrafts and ships far away from India. We may get access to American military facilities where we get logistical support. So this important agreement was also signed by India in 2016. Then the third agreement, known as COMCASA, or also known as the CIS-MOA. CIS-MOA is the generic name of this agreement, okay? Whereas the Indian version of this agreement, the agreement which was customized for India, is known as COMCASA. It stands for Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. If India signed this agreement, then it would give us access to encrypted communication technology of the US. See, India has procured many military platforms from the US. We have procured the P-8I Poseidon aircraft for anti-submarine warfare. We have procured the C-130J Super Hercules aircraft, the C-17 Globemaster, right? All these are military transport aircrafts. We have even procured the Apache attack helicopter, the Chinook transport helicopters. So we are still in the process of procuring many such advanced platforms. These aircrafts, helicopters of the US, they make use of high-end encrypted communication technology. This is to protect the communications from interception by the enemy. But when we procured the equipment, we hadn't signed COMCASA. Without signing COMCASA, US will not provide the encrypted communication technology. So the aircrafts we had procured, the C-17s, the C-130, P-8Is and the others, they came with very generic communication technology which is susceptible for interception. But in 2018, India signed the COMCASA in a historic development, and this was signed at the first 2+2 dialogue between India and US. I think in the last class we had discussed what is a 2+2 dialogue. It's a diplomatic format, it's an engagement where the defense and foreign ministers of two countries interact on a common platform. So in 2018, India-US held their first 2+2 ministerial dialogue. During this interaction, India signed the COMCASA agreement, and with this, India is eligible to procure encrypted communication technology from the US. It will strengthen the security of our military communication, especially on the American military equipment that we have procured. It will also promote interoperability amongst Indian and American forces. So with this, we had signed the 3 foundational agreements out of the 4. The last one was pending, that was BECA, or Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. This was the last agreement that India signed. It was signed last year in 2020. Last year, the BECA, the last foundational agreement, was also signed by India, and it provides for exchange of geospatial intelligence. It will give India and US real-time access to the real-time geospatial intelligence of both the countries. This intelligence would be crucial in navigation. It will provide a high degree of accuracy when you're navigating missiles, when you're targeting missiles at an enemy location. It can be used for navigating your ships and your aircrafts. So geospatial intelligence is crucial for such navigation and missile targeting. And with the signing of this agreement, India and US have gained real-time access to the geospatial intelligence of each other. So with this, India has signed all the 4 foundational agreements that was expected by the US. So now let's see which statements are correct and incorrect. The first statement is obviously correct, right? US signs 4 foundational agreements with its key defense partners. But the second statement is clearly incorrect. It says India has signed only 3 of them. This is incorrect because we have signed all the 4 foundational agreements. The third statement is correct because it says the BECA is the latest agreement signed by India. This is absolutely correct. We signed it last year, and this was the last foundational agreement we signed. The fourth one says BECA provides for exchange of logistical support at each other's military bases. This is an incorrect statement because it's not BECA, it is LEMOA, which provides for exchange of logistical support. BECA provides for exchange of geospatial intelligence. So clearly the first and the third statements are correct. Option A would be the right answer. These are some very, very important topics for prelims, and since these are some latest developments which took place over the last 1 year, you can definitely expect questions in this year's prelims on these topics. Now moving on to the third question. Partnership to Advance Clean Energy Research, or PACE-R, is an initiative between India, France, Australia, India and US, European Union, Bhutan and Japan, India, Germany and France. So let's see as to what is the correct answer. Let's talk about PACE-R initiative and automatically you'll understand what is the correct answer. See, the PACE-R initiative is related to the strategic energy partnership between India and US. From 2001 onwards, India-US relations, they really started to improve. And we signed the nuclear deal, the civilian nuclear deal was signed. So from here onwards, especially post 2005, India-US started working together in multiple domains. We were getting closer in the field of counterterrorism, in the field of defense procurement, joint military operations, even in the field of education, healthcare, climate change, etc. So one such area of cooperation which really improved between India and US was the field of energy. We opened an energy dialogue between India and US, and in 2009 we established something known as PACE, P-A-C-E. It stands for Partnership to Advance Clean Energy Research. The PACE initiative was launched between India and US under the energy dialogue that the two countries had started. Through this energy dialogue, India-US were working towards their energy security. See, India is largely dependent on imports of hydrocarbon resources, right? We are deficient in fossil fuel reserves. We largely import it from other countries. We had become excessively reliant on West Asian powers, especially countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq and the others. So India was desperately looking to diversify its energy sources. We were looking at Venezuela, we were looking at Russia, and then came the US. So under the energy dialogue, US started guaranteeing energy security to India. It started supplying crude oil to India, its shale gas reserves were made open for India. But these were all fossil fuels, that is the dirty fuel which contributes for emissions and climate change and global warming. So parallelly, we opened a clean energy initiative, a joint initiative known as PACE, to promote the development of cleaner forms of energy. Is that clear? So today this energy dialogue has been elevated to the level of strategic energy partnership, and this was done in 2018. So through this strategic energy partnership, India and US are focusing on cleaner forms of energy as well, that is renewable forms of energy. We are working together in the field of solar energy, wind power, right, with regard to biofuels, hydrogen. So all the cleaner renewable forms of energy is being explored by India and US. This is a very, very important initiative. It brings India-US closer, it makes them work towards cleaner forms of energy, and it also guarantees energy security for India. It helps us diversify our energy sources, our energy basket, right? So this topic is in news because recently, just a few months back, India-US have agreed to revamp their strategic energy partnership. Through this upgradation, we are focusing more on clean energy sectors. Dedicated focus is being given by both the countries to clean energy sectors, and we are collaborating in the field of biofuels, carbon capture, carbon utilization and storage, that is essentially carbon sequestration. So this has also emerged as an area of cooperation to deal with greenhouse gas emissions. Then we are working together with regard to hydrogen-based fuel, which can be a clean form of energy, right? So in all these clean forms of energy, we are working together. There is joint partnership, there is joint research and development that's going on. So under the PACE initiative, there are two components, the two main components. One is PACE R and the other is PACE deployment. So PACE R and PACE D, these are the two major components of the PACE initiative where India, US are partnering together to promote and to advance cleaner forms of energy. This is in line with the vision of India and US to move towards low carbon pathways. We are trying to achieve our climate change targets, reduce our emissions and adopt cleaner forms of energy. So under the PACE partnership, we have these two components, that is PACE R and PACE D. PACE R deals with research, joint research between Indian and American institutions where they develop cleaner forms of energy. They develop more efficient forms of renewable energy in the field of solar, in the field of biofuels, hydrogen, etc. Whereas PACE D deals with deployment. Here the two countries work with their private sector as well. It's not just the government institutions. Even the private sector will be brought on board to deploy these cleaner forms of energy, to deploy them and ensure that efficient, clean and renewable forms of energy can be produced, which can put both the countries on the low carbon pathway. So that is the objective of the PACE initiative. So the correct answer to this question is option B. It's an initiative between India and the United States. Let's go to the next question. India has been invited by which country or by which grouping to join the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency? To answer this question, first you need to know what is circular economy. If you understand what is circular economy, then we can talk about this Global Alliance and it will be a very straightforward answer to this question. See, circular economy, it's a model of economic development. It's a model of industrial production which is being promoted around the world by several global institutions. The United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, IMF, European Union, all these global institutions, they are promoting this new model of industrial production and development known as the circular economy. This is based on the principle of sustainability. See, when we produce goods in our economy, right, we are making use of several raw materials. We have to source several raw materials to produce certain goods, be it an electronic item or be it automobile equipment, right, or be it engineering equipment, be it the day-to-day products we use. To manufacture anything, to produce anything, we need to source raw materials. These raw materials are precious. There is a limited supply of these raw materials. And the more you exploit, when you over-exploit these resources, it will significantly damage our environment and our biodiversity. Correct? When there is over-exploitation of resources, when there is wastage of resources, you are destroying your environment. It will lead to over-exploitation and it will destroy your biodiversity. So it is in this context that the concept of circular economy has been brought out. In this model of industrial production, focus is given to the entire life cycle of a product. The entire life cycle of a product is covered under the circular economy model. See, when we produce a new product, it is sold, it is bought by the consumer, they use it for a certain period and they dispose it, they throw it off. It becomes a waste product. It reaches a landfill or an incinerator and most of these precious raw materials are wasted, right? Many of these raw materials might even be toxic. They might even pollute the environment. And precious resources are also being lost when you unscientifically dispose the raw materials. So in the circular economy, the focus is on bringing back these raw materials into the production cycle. That is why it's called the circular economy, where you circulate the raw materials, right? You source the raw materials, produce something, after the product has been used, when you're disposing it, right, throughout the stage, throughout this life cycle, we have to prioritize, repair, reuse, refurbish and recycle. So by focusing on these 4 R's, you can circulate the raw materials, bring it back into production, thereby reduce the wastage of natural resources, reduce the wastage of raw materials. So this is a model of sustainable development. It's a sustainable model of industrial production. So this model is being championed around the world, and the European Union has come out with this initiative. This initiative known as the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. It basically provides for efficient management of resources, efficient utilization of raw materials. So this initiative was launched by the European Commission, which is one of the primary organs of the EU. The European Commission functions as the secretariat or as the executive wing of the European Union. It is the executive arm of the European Union. So European Union launched this initiative along with the United Nations Environment Programme and UNIDO, or United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Please make a note of this. It's a very, very important fact for prelims. This initiative was launched by the European Commission with the support of UNEP and UNIDO. These institutions have launched the initiative, and it fulfills the European Green Deal, which has been promoted by the European Union. See, European Union has committed to a few targets with regard to sustainable development and climate action. So to achieve these targets and goals, it has adopted a plan under the European Green Deal. So under this initiative, last year, the European Union launched the Circular Economy Action Plan. The Circular Economy Action Plan was launched as a part of these environmental commitments of the European Union. Just a few months back, the Global Alliance has been launched as an initiative under this Circular Economy Action Plan. Is that clear? So it's an initiative of the European Union focused on sustainable development and promoting resource efficiency in order to minimize the wastage of resources. That is the purpose. So under the European Green Deal, the EU had adopted the Circular Economy Action Plan, under which this Global Alliance initiative has been launched. And the EU is inviting other countries as well to take part in this Global Alliance, and I have provided the list of countries which have been invited to join this Global Alliance. As you can see, even India is a part of it. Even India has been invited by the EU to take part in this Global Alliance. That is why the topic was in news. So you should know what is a circular economy, right? And you should know that this alliance, this global initiative, was launched by the European Union, and India has been invited by the EU to be a part of this global alliance. Next question. Consider the following statements. MYC, or Mobilize Your City, is a global climate initiative for integrated urban mobility planning. It is being implemented in India with the support of the European Union and the French and the German governments. It is one of the 15 international transport initiatives of the UN Global Climate Action Agenda. It was launched at the 21st Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention held in Paris in 2015. Which of the above statements are correct? First, let's talk about this initiative. Then, it's very easy to answer such straightforward factual questions. This initiative was very much in news over the last 1 year, okay, because many initiatives have been taken up in India and it was being reported in newspapers. That's why I've picked this topic. It could be a potential question in prelims. So let's see as to what this initiative is all about. See, the Mobilize Your City initiative, or the MYC initiative, it was launched by the European Union with the backing of France and Germany. the French and the German governments, along with the European Union, launched this MYC initiative, that is Mobilize Your City initiative, at the Paris summit of the Climate Change Convention in 2015. I'm sure you know that the Paris summit is a historic summit because it led to the adoption of the Paris Agreement, under which we have taken up voluntary contributions to deal with climate change, right? So it is one of the final binding agreements under Climate Change Convention, which is pushing the world towards mitigating the impact of global warming and climate change. So during this summit, the EU proposed the MYC initiative along with France and Germany. The objective of this initiative is to promote urban transport planning and urban mobility planning, because urban transportation is directly responsible for large-scale emissions of greenhouse gases, right? In cities around the world, urban mobility and urban transportation, including mass transportation, is directly contributing to climate change. It makes an immense contribution towards global warming and even towards air pollution. So to deal with the challenges in urban transportation and urban mobility, the MYC initiative was launched. It's a global initiative, it's a global climate initiative, and even India is a part of this. Is that clear? India also takes part in this initiative along with many other countries, and those countries which are participating in the initiative, they receive support from the European Union, from France and Germany. What kind of support? They receive financial assistance and as well as technical assistance. They share the best practices with regard to efficient urban transportation. The idea is to bring down emission of greenhouse gases from our urban transportation. Is that clear? So this is the initiative, and it is part of one of the 15 international transport initiatives under the UN Global Climate Action Agenda. Under the UN Global Climate Action Agenda, 15 such transportation initiatives have been adopted globally. One of them is the MYC initiative, Mobilize Your City initiative. So India is taking part in this initiative. The government of India at New Delhi coordinates with the EU and France and Germany through the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. That's the nodal ministry to work with these partners. And under this project, the pilot project, we have selected 3 Indian cities to take part in this initiative. This includes Ahmedabad, Nagpur and Kochi. Please remember, this point can be important for prelims. Ahmedabad, Nagpur and Kochi have been selected for the pilot project, and in these 3 cities, urban transportation initiatives are being implemented with the support of EU, France and Germany. The objective is to bring down emissions, reduce air pollution and help tackle climate change and global warming. Is that clear? At the national level, the government of India cooperates with these global institutions and with these foreign partners. They provide the technical support and financial support. And finally, the initiatives are implemented by the local bodies, that is the urban local bodies, which is nothing but your municipal corporations. Is that clear? The idea is to bring more efficiency in our urban transportation planning. That is the objective of this initiative. So all the 4 statements given over here are correct. Option D would be the right answer. Next, moving on, we'll take up a question on UN Security Council. The United Nations and the UN Security Council, both the topics have been very much in news over the last 1 year. And for this year, for this prelims, UNSC is going to be very, very important because India assumed the presidency of the UNSC last month. Currently, India is serving as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. India is serving a 2-year term as a non-permanent member at the UNSC, right? So last month we even occupied the seat of presidency of the UNSC. So that's why the topic can be very important. So first let's look at the question and then talk about India's role at the UN Security Council. As India assumed the UNSC presidency in August 2021, it outlined which of the following priority areas? Climate change, maritime security, peacekeeping, counter-terrorism, nuclear disarmament. Let's see as to which is the correct answer by having a discussion on this topic. Let's get a little in depth and understand what role has India played at the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member. See, as a non-permanent member, India is part of the UNSC for the 8th time. Throughout our history, we have already been a non-permanent member of the UNSC 7 times for 7 terms. This is the 8th term for which India has been elected. So from 2021 to 22, for these 2 years, India will hold the non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council. At the UNSC, the presidency rotates. It rotates amongst the member countries. So in a 2-year term, the countries usually get a chance twice to be the president, to occupy the presidency of UN Security Council. So India's turn came up last month, that is in August 2021, and India took up many initiatives. It made use of the opportunity to play a leadership role, to provide leadership to global affairs. Is that clear? So as soon as India occupied the UNSC presidency, several initiatives were launched by India. Because the country which holds the presidency can decide the rules of engagement. It can decide the points to be discussed, the resolutions to be brought in, the issues to focus on. The agenda, basically the agenda of the UNSC will be set by that country which holds the presidency of the UNSC. So India made full use of this opportunity. Right from the beginning, India identified 3 important priority areas. This included maritime security, UN peacekeeping, and counter-terrorism. The 3 most important areas for India. These 3 areas were prioritized, and accordingly, a lot of successful initiatives were taken up by India on these 3 domains. Okay? So the correct answer would be 2, 3, and 4 only. Option B is your right answer. So as a part of this initiative, Prime Minister Modi even addressed the UNSC. This was the first time that an Indian Prime Minister was addressing the UNSC from the chair position, from the presidency position, right? During this summit, the Prime Minister highlighted the 3 important areas, the 3 priority areas. He gave utmost importance to maritime security, considering the challenges we are facing in the Indo-Pacific region, right? In the Indo-Pacific, there is a lot of activity going on. China especially has been very aggressive, and China has been threatening the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Maritime security has emerged as a big concern in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So India brought up a debate on this, and in the end, we even adopted a resolution on maritime security, which was the first time that UNSC was adopting such a resolution on the topic of maritime security. So that was the initiative that was taken by India. Next, we focused on peacekeeping as well. Because see, UNSC has the powers to deploy the UN peacekeeping forces. The UN peacekeeping forces are deployed under the powers of the UN Security Council, right? India is one of the major contributor of troops to the UN peacekeeping forces. India is a major troop contributing country. We have deployed thousands of Indian soldiers from our armed forces, our paramilitary forces. They have served under the UN flag. Several Indian soldiers have even lost their lives in conflict zones. And India has made an immense contribution to UN peacekeeping in the past. But the irony is that the troop contributing countries, they never get to have a say in how the peacekeeping forces are deployed. Because these powers are largely restricted to the P5, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. They can use their veto power, and this gives them full control over the deployment and duties of the peacekeeping forces. But it is countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the others who contribute the troops, who are putting the lives of their soldiers at risk, right? Because they're being deployed in a conflict zone to maintain peace. So India's long-standing demand has been that troop contributing countries should also be given a say should also be given some control in deciding the deployment of the peacekeeping forces. This is one of the agendas of India under UN reforms. But this has never happened because the P5 countries have been blocking these initiatives. So India made use of the opportunity, brought up the concerns and issues of peacekeeping forces, and we held a separate debate on peacekeeping and technology. India brought up a debate. Finally, a resolution was also adopted for the first time on using technology to aid the peacekeeping forces. When you use better technology, if you are able to collect better intelligence, right, if you are able to protect the troops, you can save the lives of the peacekeeping forces. So India held a debate on this. A resolution was also adopted on how technology can be used to assist the peacekeeping forces. We even drafted a resolution to ensure accountability for crimes that are committed against peacekeepers. There could be violent outfits, there could be a civil war, there could be a terrorist group or an insurgent group, right, in conflict zones. These actors, or maybe even state actors, they might target the peacekeeping forces, they might commit crimes against them. So to hold them accountable and to provide justice to the peacekeeping forces, India held a debate on this, and for the first time a resolution was adopted on this topic as well, right? Next, we spoke about the need for countering terrorism. We highlighted the threat posed by state sponsors of terrorism, which was an indirect message to Pakistan, right? Then India also called upon the UN to adopt the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which has been sponsored by India, which India brought up in 1996. Since 96, this India-sponsored convention is pending at the UN. It hasn't got enough support. So we are reminding the other countries to adopt this convention, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. It specifically targets state sponsors of terrorism. It targets the terror sanctuaries and terror safe havens, which allows terrorists to operate freely and target other countries. Right? So India made use of the opportunity to cover all these issues. We even spoke about the situation in Afghanistan, right? A resolution was adopted on the situation in Afghanistan after Taliban had captured Afghanistan and Kabul. Then India even held many successful discussions throughout the month on several important regions like Myanmar, Syria, Yemen, on the Middle East peace process, etc. Right? In all these regions, in all these countries, there are conflicts going on, there are civil wars which have broken out. So India held fruitful discussions on all these issues and made a positive contribution to the UN Security Council. So these initiatives in particular can be important for your prelims, and the focus areas are also very important, right? So the correct answer is option B, 2, 3 and 4 only. The next question, it's related to the same topic. As a principal organ of the UN, the UNSC exercises which of the following powers? The UNSC, yes, it is one of the principal organs of the UN. So what are the powers of the UNSC? What is its mandate? What tasks can it carry out? Right? That is the question. Can it authorize the use of force? Can it impose sanctions? Can it deploy peacekeeping forces? Can it settle legal disputes between member states? And can it designate global terrorists? So let's see what is the answer. Let's understand the role of the UN Security Council. Is that clear? First, the composition. We already know that the UNSC has 5 permanent members, also known as the P5, right? This includes US, Russia, France, UK and China. These 5 countries are the 5 permanent members and they enjoy the veto power, the veto right. This gives them tremendous powers to veto any resolution of the UN, okay? And there are 10 non-permanent seats which are filled on the basis of an election held once in every 2 years. For a 2-year term, non-permanent members are elected, okay? And the seats for the non-permanent members are allocated on the basis of a geographical quota. For different regions of the world, seats have been allocated as per a quota system. For example, Asia Pacific, which covers India, has been allocated 2 seats. Countries of Asia Pacific, the countries of the Asia Pacific region, they will have to contest the elections and try and win a seat at the UN Security Council. So in 2020, India contested one such election. We won the election, and that is how India became a non-permanent member for the 8th term, for the 8th period between 2021 and 2022. These non-permanent members, they do not have the veto. However, they can participate in all the discussions, they can vote upon it, right? They can even propose resolutions, bring up issues and discuss them. So as a UNSC member, you do get to play an important role in global peace and security. This is the primary mandate, the primary responsibility of the UN Security Council. Okay? When the UN was established in 1945, after the Second World War, its mandate was to promote international peace, security and international stability. So under this mandate, the UN carries out many functions. For example, it has the powers to deploy the peacekeeping forces, which we already discussed. It has the powers to authorize the UN members to use force, to authorize the use of force against other countries. Take for example Afghanistan. When the 9/11 attacks happened, Taliban refused to cooperate to bring down the Al-Qaeda. The US and the coalition forces, they obtained the approval of the UN and carried out an invasion of Afghanistan. The UN gave approval and it authorized the use of force against Afghanistan. So such authorization for use of force can be provided, right? It also plays a role in appointing the UN Secretary General, in the election of judges to the International Court of Justice. Apart from this, the UNSC has the powers to impose economic sanctions as well. It can impose economic sanctions against those countries which are violating key laws of the UN. If countries are violating critical international laws, if they are openly violating the rules-based order and threatening peace and stability, then sanctions can be imposed against them. It can approve the use of force, deploy peacekeeping forces. It also has the powers to designate global terrorists. There is a sanctions committee known as the UNSC 1267 Sanctions Committee. We are going to talk about this later. Through this sanctions committee, the UNSC can even designate global terrorists. Okay? Then, the UNSC can mediate any disputes, but it refers to territorial disputes and conflicts. Is that clear? If two countries are fighting against each other, if a war has broken out, if there is a territorial dispute, if there is a conflict going on, in such cases, UNSC can mediate between the two fighting parties and try to push them towards a peace deal. Right? For example, when India-Pakistan fought the Kashmir war, the UNSC did mediate and pushed India and Pakistan to work out a settlement. But however, it cannot settle the regular legal disputes between the member states. This is the domain of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. ICJ has the mandate to settle the legal disputes. But when it comes to territorial disputes, conflicts and wars which are going on, then the UNSC can play a role in mediating between the conflicting parties. Is that clear? So the fourth one is incorrect. It is the role of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, whereas all the other four, they fall under the mandate of the UNSC. So 1, 2, 3 and 5, option C would be the correct answer. Next, we're going to talk about something that's related to UNSC again. This is related to the 1267 Sanctions Committee that I was mentioning. When an individual is designated as a global terrorist by the UNSC, what action follows? What happens after that? See, 1267 is a resolution that was adopted by the UN Security Council back in 1999. Initially, it was even known as the Al-Qaeda and Taliban Sanctions Committee, because the resolution was primarily adopted to target the terrorists belonging to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, right? So under this resolution, a sanctions committee has been constituted at the UNSC, and this sanctions committee includes all the 15 members of the UNSC. That is the 5 permanent members and the 10 non-permanent members. So these 15 members of the UNSC, they get to decide, they get to designate individuals as global terrorists. The UN members, all the UN members can propose the names, right? They can bring up evidence to show that an individual is a global terrorist committing acts of terrorism. And if it is found to be valid, a voting will be held at the UNSC, and if all the members concede, if there is consensus amongst all the 15 countries, the individual can be designated as a global terrorist. Once designated as a global terrorist, 3 actions will follow against that individual. All the UN member states are obligated to take these measures against global terrorists. This includes placing travel restrictions on the individual. There will be a travel embargo which prevents the individual, the terrorist, from traveling to other countries. There will be an arms embargo. He should be prevented by the UN member states from procuring arms and weapons. And third, there will be financial sanctions which leads to the freezing of all his known assets. His financial assets, his accounts, every known financial asset would be frozen by UN countries, UN members around the world. Is that clear? So these are the actions that follow immediately after an individual has been designated as a global terrorist. So freezing of financial assets is correct, travel ban is correct, arms embargo is correct. But this doesn't lead to a trial at the International Criminal Court, right? This doesn't follow the sanctioning of a terrorist. So the third one would be incorrect. There is no provision for trying the terrorist at the International Criminal Court. It's not part of the sanctions committee. So 1, 2 and 4 are correct. Option D is your right answer. Okay? This topic is very frequently in news. Recently, this sanctions committee has been broken. It has been divided into 2 parts. In 2012, UNSC resolution 1988 was adopted. So today 1988 resolution specifically deals with Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Okay? Whereas resolution number 2253 adopted in 2015 deals with the Islamic State, or also known as the Daesh, and the Al-Nusra Front, which is seen as a branch of the Al-Qaeda that operates in the Iraq-Syria region. Right? So today there are 2 separate resolutions that deal with these terrorist outfits. The 1988 Sanctions Committee deals with terror groups like Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Then 2253 resolution deals with Islamic State, Daesh and the Al-Nusra Front. Okay? All the UN member states are legally bound. They have an obligation, a legal obligation to implement these measures, these restrictions as they are committed to under the UN Charter. Understood? It's a legally binding provision. They have to place these restrictions on the designated terrorists. India has got many terrorists designated as global terrorists. The Pakistan-based terrorists, for example, Hafiz Saeed, the founder, the leader of Hafiz Saeed, the founder of Lashkar-e-Toiba and the head of Jamaat-ud-Dawa, right? Following 26/11 attacks, the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, India got Hafiz Saeed designated as a global terrorist by the Sanctions Committee. Then we made many attempts to designate Masood Azhar, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, as a global terrorist. From 2009 to 2019, for 1 decade, India kept making multiple attempts to designate Masood Azhar as well as a global terrorist. But every time, China was blocking India's efforts, because decisions at the committee is made through consensus. Even if one country votes against it, the individual cannot be designated as a global terrorist. So every time India attempted to designate Masood Azhar as a terrorist, China was blocking these efforts of India in order to shield Pakistan. Is that clear? But we had succeeded in getting Hafiz Saeed designated as a global terrorist. Then after the Pulwama attacks of 2019, finally there was tremendous pressure on China to stop helping Pakistan. The other permanent members, that is US, France, Russia and UK, they all put a lot of pressure on China to ensure that Masood Azhar, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, which was responsible for the Pulwama attacks, was designated as a global terrorist. So in 2019, even Masood Azhar was designated as a terrorist through the 1267 Sanctions Committee. This committee is frequently in news. Even the 1988 Sanctions Committee is always in news because of the current situation in Afghanistan, right? Because many leaders who have been included in the Afghan government, the interim Taliban government, they are UN designated terrorists. The Interior Minister, Sirajuddin Haqqani, the Prime Minister of Afghanistan, who has been recently appointed, many such top government leaders, right, of the so-called Taliban government, they are all UN designated terrorists. So these sanction committees are frequently in news, and you can expect a prelims question on this. Okay? So the correct answer is option D, 1, 2, 4 only. It doesn't result in a trial at the International Criminal Court, but all the other three measures have to be taken by the UN member states. Next, moving on. The non-aligned movement was founded at the Belgrade Conference in 1961. NAM does not have a formal constitution or permanent secretariat. NAM countries haven't met or interacted since the pandemic broke out. Which of the statements are incorrect? So let's see what is the non-aligned movement or NAM. See, this is an ideological movement which was championed by India and a few other countries during the Cold War era. After the World War ended, right, the Cold War emerged between the two superpowers, that is US and the Soviet Union. The global community was divided between these two power blocks. The US was leading the Western world that represented democracy and capitalism. The Soviet power bloc was leading the communist and socialist countries of the world, thereby creating a bipolar world. And all the other countries were expected to choose sides between US and Soviet Union. So this rivalry was increasing tensions in the world, and it was pushing the world towards another conflict. So in the middle of this Cold War era that started after the Second World War, India and few other countries, they took a paradigm shift in their foreign policy. They decided not to choose sides between US and Soviet Union. They decided to adopt a neutral path, to remain neutral in this Cold War by becoming non-aligned. The term non-alignment or non-aligned was already being used at the United Nations back in 1950s itself. Later with China, India championed the Panchsheel Agreement of 1954 based on the principles of peaceful coexistence. Right, with China we adopted the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, or also known as the Panchsheel Agreement. So India was championing a very new foreign policy doctrine. We were trying to be different from the other countries. We were not siding with the US or the Soviet Union, and we didn't want to contribute to rising tensions, military tensions in the world. We wanted to prevent another global conflict at any cost. So India, along with few other like-minded countries, they got together at the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in 1955, and they laid the foundation for a non-aligned movement. The concept was brought out. So this concept was championed by India along with other like-minded countries and their leaders from Egypt, then Indonesia. These were all the founding members of the non-aligned movement. Then even Ghana, the African nation, was a part of it, and Yugoslavia. So these were the countries which laid the foundation for the non-aligned movement. India, Yugoslavia, Egypt, Indonesia and Ghana. These 5 leaders of these countries came together at the Bandung Conference in Indonesia and laid the foundation for non-alignment. Finally, this took the shape of a grouping in 1961 at the Belgrade Conference, and the non-aligned movement was established. So the principle of non-alignment was very relevant for several decades, especially during the Cold War. But in 1971, India was forced to abandon the principle of non-alignment and side with the Soviet Union because India was being threatened by the US during the liberation of Bangladesh War of 1971. in the liberation of Bangladesh war, the US had threatened India with military consequences. So under this threat, India was forced to abandon non-alignment and we sided with the Soviet Union by signing the historic Treaty of Peace and Friendship, right? But even after that, we were still committed to the principle of non-alignment. We were still actively taking part in the non-aligned movement summits. But of late, in the last 15-20 years, non-alignment has lost its relevance, right? India especially has moved away from this grouping. In fact, Prime Minister Modi didn't even participate in some of the previous summits. That shows the declining significance of the non-aligned movement and the reducing priority that India has been giving to the non-aligned movement. But last year, there was a new initiative that was taken up, and that is why the topic is in news. Is that clear? Last year, a virtual NAM summit was held, and Prime Minister Modi took part in this initiative because this initiative was focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. After several years of boycotting the NAM summit, Prime Minister Modi took part in this virtual NAM summit of a contact group on the topic of COVID-19. Okay, this summit took place last year, right when the pandemic had broken out. So non-aligned countries came together to discuss cooperation and how they could help each other out in combating the pandemic. So India played a key role in bringing these countries together, and India even gave some assistance, and we even launched a few joint initiatives during the virtual NAM summit, which was designed to help the NAM members battle the COVID-19 pandemic. This grouping has around 120 member states. Okay, it's a prominent grouping. Many countries, they still actively pursue the group, the objectives of the group, but India in the last 2 decades has reduced its involvement. Okay, but since we took part in the virtual summit last year, it again gains prominence. That's why it's important for your exams. So the first statement is correct. The NAM movement was founded at the Belgrade Conference in 1961. That's when it was formally constituted. The idea was brought together at the Bandung Conference, but it was in 1961 that the NAM grouping was formally set up. Then, it does not have a formal constitution or a permanent secretariat. That's correct. NAM does not have a formal constitution. It does not have a permanent secretariat. However, third statement is incorrect because last year the virtual summit took place. Whereas the third statement says NAM countries haven't met or interacted since the pandemic broke out. So third statement is clearly incorrect, right? So since the question is asking you to identify the incorrect statement, option B would be the right answer. 3 only. The third statement is the only incorrect statement. Next, moving on. The Master Plan for Transport Connectivity is a proposed initiative of which regional grouping? BIMSTEC, SAARC, ASEAN, IORA. This initiative, this connectivity initiative, has been proposed by the BIMSTEC grouping. In the last class, we studied what is the BIMSTEC group. So under this regional organization, a transport connectivity project has been proposed. Okay, it's called the Master Plan for Transport Connectivity. It is backed and supported by the Asian Development Bank, and this connectivity project is likely to be adopted by the BIMSTEC countries at the upcoming summit of the BIMSTEC group. So this is basically a master plan to promote connectivity between Southeast Asia and South Asia. The BIMSTEC grouping has members from both South Asia and Southeast Asia. So several ambitious connectivity routes and transport corridors have been proposed under this master plan. Okay, it includes air-based connectivity, land connectivity and sea connectivity. All forms of connectivity, multiple modes of transportation are envisioned under this master plan. It was designed by the Asian Development Bank, and the ADB is looking to fund these initiatives, and it has identified 167 connectivity projects, which will help bring South Asian countries closer to Southeast Asian countries. Okay, it's focused on the BIMSTEC members such as India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar and Thailand. Okay, the cost of these initiatives, these projects, is estimated to be around $50 billion, and it proposes to integrate several existing highways, railway lines, roadways, inland navigation routes, and as well as sea and air routes. So it involves multiple modes of transportation and connectivity. Out of these 167 projects identified by ADB, BIMSTEC has prioritized 66 of them. It's looking to adopt them and take them forward at the upcoming summit. The master plan is likely to be adopted soon, and this will also synchronize with the ASEAN master plan on connectivity. Just like BIMSTEC group has come out with a master plan for connectivity, similarly the ASEAN grouping for Southeast Asian countries also has come out with a master plan on connectivity. So the BIMSTEC's plan on connectivity will synchronize with ASEAN's plan on transport and connectivity. This is also in line with India's objectives under the Act East policy. Right? Under the Act East policy, we have given utmost priority for connectivity projects focused on Southeast Asia and East Asia. So this master plan of BIMSTEC will align with the master plan of ASEAN. It will help bring India and other countries closer to Southeast Asia. Is that clear? Even the ambitious trilateral highway project is a part of this master plan. The India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. This trilateral highway is one of the ambitious connectivity projects that we are executing under the Look East, Act East policy of India. Is that clear? Under the Look East, Act East policy of India, the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway project has been taken up. This project is nearing completion. It was delayed for a few years due to various issues, but after we upgraded the Look East policy into the Act East policy in 2014, there is renewed attention on the project to bring India closer to Myanmar and Thailand. So this project, the route and the alignment of the project can be very important for your prelims. You can expect a map-based question. So please note down the key locations, the key cities and commercial centers that are being connected through this trilateral highway project. It connects a border town of India known as Moreh in the state of Manipur. It's a very important commercial center located on the India-Myanmar border. It's a trading point as well. So from here the highway will connect with Mandalay and Yangon in Myanmar, and it will further connect with Mae Sot in Thailand. There is also a proposal to extend this highway to connect with Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. There is a proposal under the Act East policy of India to extend this trilateral highway to connect with other Southeast Asian countries such as Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. We have even proposed a railway link. A rail link has been proposed parallel to this road that will connect Delhi with Hanoi. Is that clear? These are important connectivity projects that we are working on. Parallel to the highway, we have even proposed a railway link that would connect Delhi with Hanoi, which will bring India closer to all these Southeast Asian countries. So these projects which are being championed by India are also included under the BIMSTEC's master plan. 66 projects are being taken up on priority. It will be funded by the Asian Development Bank, and it will align and synchronize with ASEAN's master plan on connectivity as well. So it's a very, very important initiative, hence can be very important for prelims. Next question. The BRICS CGETI is responsible for what? Trade and economic issues, climate action and biodiversity conservation, money laundering and terrorist financing, or cybersecurity. Let's see as to what CGETI is all about. See, under the BRICS grouping, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, there is a contact group that deals with economic and trade issues. CGETI stands for the Contact Group on Economic and Trade Issues. This question becomes important, this topic becomes important because recently in July 2021, this contact group had a meeting. There was an important meeting of this grouping of BRICS that took place. It's one of the platforms under BRICS, and many key issues were discussed related to trade and economic issues of the BRICS countries. Is that clear? So that is why this topic is important. This contact group deals with economic and trade matters, and from India, it is the Department of Commerce which coordinates with this contact group of BRICS. During the latest summit that took place, the BRICS members discussed various measures to improve trade amongst the BRICS countries. They have come out with few initiatives and measures to improve intra-regional trade or intra-member trade amongst the BRICS nations. They want to further strengthen their trade infrastructure, promote the movement of goods between these 5 member countries. Okay, I've listed the important initiatives over here. They have worked out a cooperation on multilateral trading system. They have come out with a framework for regulating e-commerce amongst the BRICS countries. They have also come out with a resolution for dealing with non-tariff measures or non-taxation related measures such as sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Okay, this is a barrier to trade. Sanitary, phytosanitary measures, it becomes a barrier to trade for especially for developing countries when they are exporting goods to developed countries. Because developed countries expect very high standards of sanitary and phytosanitary standards. They expect very high hygiene standards when you're exporting food items, medicines, agricultural products, etc. Right? It's a biosecurity measure that they take to prevent the entry of any harmful pathogens and pests and microorganisms. But for developing countries, it's very hard to meet these standards, so it becomes a barrier to trade. It's a non-tariff barrier. So BRICS countries have taken some measures and they brought out a resolution to deal with such non-tariff barriers and to promote trade amongst them by overcoming the sanitary, phytosanitary barriers. Is that clear? Next, they have also agreed to cooperate in the field of traditional knowledge in order to promote and protect their genetic resources. The indigenous knowledge which is held by our indigenous communities, it is sought to be protected, right? This falls under the intellectual property regime. So for this, they have worked out a framework and they have also signed a framework for professional services which will help in the movement of professionals from one country to another. So through these measures, they are looking to promote trade and investments and economic relations amongst the BRICS countries, right? That is why the group was in news. So the BRICS organization, right? It's one of the most important groupings that India is part of. This idea of BRICS was first proposed back in 2001. At Goldman Sachs, the chairman of Goldman Sachs, Jim O'Neill, he came out with the acronym BRIC or BRIC. It represented or it stood for Brazil, Russia, India and China. So the then chairman of Goldman Sachs, Jim O'Neill, he said that these 4 countries are emerging economies and they have the potential to dominate the global economy. So he coined the acronym BRIC to refer to these 4 emerging economies. So this concept later turned into a diplomatic initiative. The BRIC countries, they started taking the proposal seriously. The foreign ministers of the BRIC countries, they started meeting regularly on the sidelines of the UN summits. Then in 2008, the world was hit by the financial crisis. Right? The global financial crisis pushed the world, the global economy into recession, and the BRIC countries, they held the Western countries responsible for the crisis. Because according to the BRIC nations, global financial institutions like World Bank, IMF, they had failed to prevent the crisis because they were all dominated by Western countries. World Bank is dominated by the US. IMF is dominated by the European Union. So when the global financial crisis occurred in 2008-2009, BRIC countries held the Western countries responsible and they took a firm stand against World Bank and IMF. They kept pushing for reforms of these global financial institutions. Because World Bank and IMF, the 2 Bretton Woods institutions, they are still stuck in the World War era when they were constituted. So to push reforms, to give more voting share and voting rights to the emerging economies, they demanded the reforms of World Bank and IMF. So they faced resistance from the Western countries, from US and European countries. This finally led the BRIC members to come together and launch their own summit. So after the financial crisis in 2009, for the first time a formal BRIC summit was held. This was the first BRIC summit. It was held at Yekaterinburg in Russia. Okay, this was formed as a counter to the Western dominated financial system, right? That was the initial objective. Then later in next year, in 2010, South Africa was admitted and it formally joined in 2011. Thus the BRIC became the BRICS. Now it became the BRICS grouping, which included 5 emerging economies from different continents. So from here onwards, the BRICS has taken many positive steps, many positive initiatives. It has established the New Development Bank, or the NDB. This is seen as a rival to the World Bank, which is dominated by the US. The NDB of BRICS is seen as a rival or as a counter to the World Bank. And the BRICS countries have set up the CRA, or the Contingent Reserve Arrangement. This is seen as a counter to the IMF. The CRA, or the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, is seen as a counter to the IMF. So like this, the BRICS countries have openly challenged the Western dominated global financial system. They have come out with their own credit rating agencies. They are planning their own submarine cable to protect their data security, right? Recently, just last week, just few days back, the BRICS summit was also held, right? Just few days back, 4 to 5 days back, India hosted the BRICS summit. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi took part in the summit, and several important initiatives have been announced. So these initiatives can also be important for your exams. Okay? Under the BRICS grouping, a digital health summit has been launched following the pandemic. BRICS members will cooperate in the health domain and they will promote digital healthcare. So a digital health summit has been launched under BRICS. Please note down this point. They have even come out with a joint statement on reforming multilateral institutions. This is a reference to World Bank and IMF and other multilateral institutions like the UN. So India and other countries are giving a push for reforming the multilateral institutions. Next, BRICS is also adopting a counter-terrorism action plan. See, today BRICS is not limited to economic issues and financial issues. It has diversified and it is focusing on defense, security and strategic issues as well. It's focusing on counter-terrorism, on major conflicts going on in the world. So it has acquired a strategic angle today, right? So they have adopted a counter-terrorism action plan. They have even signed an agreement for cooperation on remote sensing satellites. They have even set up a virtual vaccine research and development center to jointly develop a vaccine for COVID-19 and other diseases. And they have even launched an alliance on green tourism. These are some of the recent initiatives which have been announced. Please make a note, they can be important for prelims. So this makes BRICS a very, very important grouping. It gives India an opportunity to work with major powers like Russia, China, Brazil and South Africa. Okay, so that's why the BRICS topic is very important. Moving on, the next topic is on ASEAN. Consider the following statements. India and ASEAN have adopted a new plan of action for 2021-2025. India has announced a contribution of $1 million to the COVID-19 ASEAN Response Fund. India has offered a $1 billion line of credit or concessional loan to support ASEAN's connectivity projects. Which of the above statements are correct? See, the ASEAN, or the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, is one of the most important regional groupings in the world. It consists of 10 Southeast Asian countries. It includes Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia and Brunei. These are the 10 Southeast Asian countries that come together to form the ASEAN grouping. Individually, these countries might be small countries, they might be small economies. But when they come together as the ASEAN, they become a very formidable group. It is seen as a very, very strong economic grouping because each of these countries, they bring their own strength, right? Some have a strong manufacturing base, some are strong in agriculture, many are involved in financial business. For example, Singapore is a global leader in financial business, right? Then Indonesia, Thailand, they lead in food processing, in agriculture, right? Vietnam is the technology hub of Southeast Asia today. So every country brings its own advantage, and as a grouping, they become very, very strong. They become a very formidable force. So India has given utmost importance to the ASEAN grouping because ASEAN is the central pillar of our Look East, Act East policy. When we launched the Look East policy back in 1991, India was looking to diversify its relations because this was a very difficult period. In 91, the Cold War had ended, Soviet Union had collapsed, and India had lost its best friend. So India desperately needed new partners in the international community. Plus in 91, we were dealing with the economic crisis. We underwent a BOP crisis or the balance of payments crisis, right? Following this, India introduced the LPG reforms. We liberalized, privatized and globalized our economy. So we needed new markets for Indian exports. We needed new investments into India to create the essential infrastructure. For all these reasons, we needed new partners. We needed good diplomatic relations. Until then, India had largely neglected other parts of the world because we were preoccupied with our neighboring countries and we were preoccupied with global powers like US, European countries and Soviet Union. But in 91, the global world order had changed overnight. Cold War ended, India had liberalized its economy, now we needed new partners. It was at this critical juncture that the Narasimha Rao government launched the ambitious Look East policy of India to build ties with Southeast Asian countries, to give exclusive focus to Southeast Asia and as well as to East Asia. Right? For 2 decades, the policy was very successful. We even signed a free trade agreement that provides for the free movement of goods, services and investments. Now the Look East policy has been upgraded to the Act East policy. Today, we have very good relations with all the Southeast Asian countries. We engage very closely with the ASEAN grouping, and since we are heavily focused on the Indo-Pacific region, especially to counter China's aggression and China's influence, the ASEAN countries will be very, very important for India. So today, our engagement with ASEAN is not just limited to economic relations. It even includes defense and strategic relations. It includes maritime security, counter-terrorism. It includes disaster management, right? We are also working on promoting our cultural relations, our connectivity between the two regions. That's why connectivity projects are so important for India to reach out to the Southeast Asian markets, okay? So ASEAN becomes the central pillar of India's Look East, Act East policy, and it also becomes the focus area for India in the Indo-Pacific region. If India has good ties with these countries, with the grouping, it will automatically help India to counter the influence of China. Is that clear? So ASEAN is a very, very prominent organization, okay? These 10 member countries, they hold tremendous economic potential with regard to their population, with regard to their GDP, right? And with regard to area. They offer enormous possibilities for India, and India will not only find new markets here, but we can also bring investments from these countries into India, right? So we have even signed a free trade agreement which is operational, but however, we do have some issues in the free trade agreement. The issue is that the free trade agreement has not been so well negotiated. It largely benefits some of the ASEAN countries, and it has resulted in a flood of imports into India. Cheaper products from Southeast Asia have flooded the Indian markets, and it has adversely affected the domestic industry in India. For example, cheaper coffee from Vietnam has destroyed the coffee industry in Karnataka. Cheaper coconut products from Indonesia and Thailand has destroyed the coconut industry in Kerala. So such domestic industries and producers have been hit because of the India-ASEAN FTA. So we want to renegotiate the FTA. We want to plug the gaps that are there. and even we want to boost our exports. We just don't want to receive imports from these countries. So there are these minor issues, but ASEAN is a very important grouping for India, and we have good relations with the grouping, and with all the countries, India has excellent relations. Okay, that's why the topic is important. Every now and then, the India-ASEAN relations are reported in newspapers, and India-ASEAN summit keeps taking place, right? That is why the topic is important. So let's go through the statements again. India-ASEAN have adopted a new plan of action for this period. This is a correct statement. For 2021-25, they have adopted a new plan of action to give more importance to maritime security, counter-terrorism, disaster management, and economic and cultural relations. A new plan has been adopted by India and ASEAN. That's correct. India has announced a contribution of $1 million to the COVID-19 response fund of ASEAN. This is also a correct statement. As a goodwill gesture on humanitarian grounds, India has provided this funding to the COVID fund of the ASEAN countries. Then we have even offered a $1 billion line of credit, which is a type of a concessional loan to the ASEAN group, which they can invest in connectivity projects. These connectivity projects will help India connect with the ASEAN region. So all three statements are correct. Option D is your right answer. Moving on, we have a related topic, that is RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. India's decision to quit RCEP negotiations was based on which of the following factors? Flood of imports from the member countries, declining trade deficit with member states, non-acceptance of auto-trigger mechanism to curb imports after a certain threshold, lack of consensus on rules of origin. Which of these factors led India to quit RCEP negotiations? So to get the correct answer, we should know what is RCEP and why did India quit RCEP. RCEP stands for Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Last year, in November 2020, this agreement has been signed between 15 countries of the Indo-Pacific region. And this makes RCEP the world's biggest and largest FTA. With the signing of this deal, RCEP has become the world's largest free trade agreement. India was also a part of these negotiations. See, the RCEP negotiations began in 2012 and India was also part of it. There were 16 countries which were negotiating this agreement along with India. Okay, it was not 15, it was 16 countries. The negotiations went on until 2019. It dragged for several years and India had several major objections. As we discussed previously under ASEAN, free trade agreements can be beneficial and at the same time it can be risky. If free trade agreements are not well negotiated, if your interests, your domestic interests are not protected, it can adversely affect your economy. Okay? India had several such concerns which pushed India to quit the RCEP negotiations in 2019. Okay? The other countries have now gone ahead without India and last year they have signed the agreement, making it the world's largest free trade agreement. So which countries are part of it? The 10 ASEAN countries, the 10 Southeast Asian countries. Then you have China, Japan, then you also have South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. These are the 15 countries which are a part of this trade bloc. These countries represent nearly 2.2 billion of the global population. They represent significant percentage of the global GDP and global trade. Now imagine if India was also a part of it, right? The large Indian economy with its huge population, with its huge markets. If India also had joined the agreement, then it would have been a much larger free trade agreement. But India was forced to quit because of certain concerns. What were these concerns? India was worried that there would be a flood of imports from the member countries because we already had a bitter experience with the ASEAN FTA. Many domestic industries in India were hit because of cheaper imports from ASEAN countries. Then second one, the second one is actually incorrect here, because trade deficit with the member states for India is not declining, it is increasing. Out of these 15 countries, with 11 countries our trade deficit is rising. With China, with Japan, with many Southeast Asian countries, India's trade deficit has been increasing. So this was a worry for India, this was one of the factors. So second statement becomes incorrect, whereas the first statement is correct. The flood of imports was a concern, was one of the factors. But declining trade deficit was not the concern. Rising trade deficit was the concern. The fear was that if we sign the agreement, there would be a flood of imports which will further increase the trade deficit. Next, we wanted a auto trigger mechanism to be placed which would curb the imports beyond a certain threshold. This was one of India's demands. We wanted other countries to agree to a curb or a restriction on imports after a certain point. If there is a flood of cheaper imports affecting our domestic industry, we wanted this mechanism to get triggered automatically so that the imports can be curbed and our domestic industry can be protected. But other countries didn't agree to this demand, so this also became a factor for India to quit RCEP. Then the last one, the fourth one, lack of consensus on rules of origin. This was also one of the factors. What do you mean by this? See, rules of origin basically refers to a criteria which shows that the product is originating from a particular country. Is that clear? Rules of origin is a type of a criteria which mandates that the product should declare itself, the exporter should declare that where the product is originating from. Because see, in a free trade agreement, the benefits are available only to the member countries. Now let's say, for example, if you look at India-ASEAN FTA that we have, in this FTA, what is done? The tariffs are brought down, the taxes are reduced, the duties are reduced, right? The tariff barriers are eliminated and even non-tariff barriers are reduced in order to promote the free movement of goods and services and investments. The benefits of this agreement should be available only to India and the ASEAN countries. So to establish this, to ensure this, it's important to establish where the products are coming from. Only products which are manufactured where indigenous content has been added in these countries, only those products are eligible for the tax benefits, the duty benefits. Now what if a third country, let's say like China, tries to exploit the route? If it exports a good to, let's say, ASEAN country, because China has an FTA with ASEAN countries, so it can export without any duties or tariffs, and from here it can re-export the same product to India by naming it, by labeling it as a ASEAN product, right? A third country could exploit this. A country like China could push its products to India indirectly through the ASEAN route. Why? To gain the benefit of the FTA and avoid paying duties to India. So this would significantly hit the Indian producers, the Indian markets. Is that clear? That is why products, they should clearly carry the label of rules of origin, and there should be mechanisms in the FTA to prevent other countries from misusing the FTA. On these conditions, right, India had a few demands, but other countries didn't agree to it. Australia, then Japan, China and New Zealand, they objected to India's demands on rules of origin. Okay, so India was worried that other countries like US or other countries which are not part of the FTA, they will exploit this. They will dump their products on the Indian market by rerouting those exports through the free trade areas. So it's hard to curb those imports without the rules of origin criteria. So because of these factors, we decided to quit RCEP. So 1, 3, 4 are correct. Option A is the right answer. Okay, RCEP is a very, very important topic. So please know about the members, the reasons why India has quit, and what are the provisions, what are the key features of the RCEP. Moving on to the next question, we shall look at a few global institutions, very factual, very straightforward topics, but it's going to be important because these institutions have been frequently in news. In the last 1 year, these institutions which we are going to discuss, they have been reported in newspapers multiple times. So by carefully analyzing these topics and developments, I have picked out a few important institutions. So let's go through them one by one. First question is on UNHRC, the UN Human Rights Council. The UNHRC held a special session on the serious human rights concerns and situation in Afghanistan after the Taliban took over. Special sessions of UNHRC can be called only if such a request is received and if this request gets the support of more than 1/3 of the members, that is more than 16 countries out of the 47 members of the council. First, let me give you the answer. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been taken up because UNHRC was frequently in news, especially during the latest crisis in Afghanistan. When the Taliban took over, right, immediately a resolution was moved at the UNHRC for holding a special session. Such special sessions can be held only if the request is backed by 1/3 of the countries. That is, at least 16 and more countries out of the 47 members of UNHRC should support the request. Following this, debates will be held and a resolution would be adopted. So this happened at the UNHRC. The special session on Afghanistan got the required support and a discussion took place. The members expressed concern about the human rights situation in Afghanistan and a resolution was also adopted. So that is why the question has been picked. So let's see as to what is the UNHRC. The UN Human Rights Council, right? It is meant to protect and promote human rights around the world. The composition can be important. There are a few factual points that I'm going to point out. Please make a note of them. It's very straightforward, nothing much to analyze, but we need to highlight those facts which can be important for prelims. The composition of the council is important. It has 47 members elected for staggered 3-year terms on a regional group basis. Just like UNSC, there is a regional geographical quota and members are elected from these different regions. This council is headquartered at Geneva in Switzerland. Okay? So the task of the UNHRC is to investigate and look at violations of human rights. It is meant to protect and uphold human rights in various domains, in various thematic issues. For example, if in a country freedom of association and assembly is being violated by the government, if this fundamental right is being snatched away, then UNHRC is supposed to act upon it. If freedom of expression, freedom of belief and religion, and women's rights, LGBT rights, transgender rights, and the rights of lesbian, gay and bisexual community, the rights of racial and ethnic minorities, if their fundamental basic rights are being violated by the state, then UNHRC has to act upon it. It has to hold a debate, take up investigation if required, bring up a resolution and try to take action against those countries which are violating these basic human rights and fundamental rights. Okay? Please remember the thematic issues that UNHRC is focused upon. It is on the ground of these violations that UNHRC can take up a debate and even try to push for action against those countries. So this council was established in the year 2006 to replace the UN Commission on Human Rights, the UNCHR. This was a previous organization we had, but this organization was very controversial because in UNCHR, many countries which were autocratic, many countries which themselves were violating human rights were included as members in this council, in this commission. So it became very controversial and it was also alleged that many members were misusing the previous body for their geopolitics. They were simply targeting their rivals with human right violations and human right allegations. So to replace this UN commission, the UN Human Rights Council was set up in 2006 by the UN General Assembly. This UNHRC is assisted by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the OHCHR. Okay? The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights acts as the secretariat, as the executive wing of the UNHRC. Unfortunately today, UNHRC is also hit by the same controversy. Many autocratic governments which violate fundamental rights, many governments which violate human rights, they have become members of UNHRC. Then many countries have misused UNHRC for their geopolitics to target their rivals by bringing up human right violation allegations against them. So UNHRC is a controversial platform, and it's quite often in news because of various conflict situations and human right violations around the world. Okay? So its composition, its mandate, its history can be very important. And even the procedure for a special session can be important, because recently one such special session was called following the situation in Afghanistan. Okay? So this topic is very important. Next, a related topic. The 1993 World Conference on Human Rights led to the establishment of UNHRC, International Court of Justice, Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The correct answer is option C. Is that clear? The 1993 World Conference on Human Rights, it was held in Vienna, Austria. Following this conference, the Vienna Declaration and Program for Action was adopted. This declaration deals with protection and promotion of human rights. Through this declaration, through this World Conference, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which we just discussed, was set up, it was established. This office is meant to assist the Human Rights Council. It functions as the secretariat of the UNHRC and helps uphold the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Is that clear? It is a part of the UN system of the United Nations. Its objective is to protect, promote human rights, and it works with the UNHRC. It works as the secretariat of the UNHRC, and this office, this UN office, is headed by a Commissioner for Human Rights, the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So this office will assist the UNHRC as a secretariat, provides the support that is needed, the bureaucratic support that is needed to execute the tasks and the functions of the Human Rights Council. It functions as per the principles and objectives of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Okay? So this is another important body. So please know about the Vienna Declaration, the World Conference on Human Rights, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All these human right related conventions, treaties, and institutions are very, very important. Next, consider the following statements. The International Criminal Court sits at The Hague in Netherlands. It began functioning from 2002 upon the entry into force of the Rome Statute signed in 1998. It lacks universal territorial jurisdiction. India has neither signed nor ratified the Rome Statute. We have to identify which of the statements are correct. Okay? See, the International Criminal Court, it was established in 2002. It started functioning from 2002, and it was set up through the Rome Statute signed in 1998. The first two statements are absolutely correct. Is that clear? It sits at The Hague in Netherlands. It shares the seat with the International Court of Justice and the Permanent Court of Arbitration. The Hague in Netherlands is known as the judicial capital of the world because many global judicial and arbitration bodies sit at The Hague in Netherlands. ICJ, which is a principal organ of the UN, the judicial organ, is located at The Hague. The Permanent Court of Arbitration also sits at The Hague. The International Criminal Court is also located over here. So this was set up through the Rome Statute of 98 and it started functioning from 2002. This criminal court deals with offenses such as war crimes, please write this down, genocide, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. So such grave acts of violence, such criminal acts of violence are dealt with by the International Criminal Court. The accused, the culprits, they can be charged, they can be convicted through the proceedings, through the legal proceedings of the criminal court. Is that clear? It deals with war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity and crimes of aggression. So this body, the ICC, lacks universal territorial jurisdiction. The third statement is also correct. The third statement is also correct because ICC does not have universal territorial jurisdiction. Its jurisdiction applies only in the member states which have signed and ratified the Rome Statute. It applies against those nationals of member states which have signed and ratified the Rome Statute, or it applies in situations where the matter is referred to it by the UN Security Council. So if a country doesn't sign or ratify the ICC and the Rome Statute, then ICC will have no jurisdiction over that country. Okay? India, for example, has neither signed nor ratified the Rome Statute. The fourth statement is also correct. So option D is your right answer. The ICC lacks universal territorial jurisdiction. Its jurisdiction is limited to the member states who have signed and ratified the Rome Statute. It applies to those citizens of member states when they commit these crimes. Then it will apply in special situations where the UN Security Council will refer the matter to the ICC. So in cases of civil war, in cases of wars and conflicts, if there are such gross violations committed, the guilty, the accused, right, they can be charged and they can be tried at the International Criminal Court. Many high profile cases have taken place with regard to conflicts in Africa and West Asia. Okay? So it's an important body. There is a reason why India has stayed out of it, because see, India itself has many conflict zones. We have Kashmir, we have the Naxal Red Corridor, the Naxal Corridor, we have the Northeast, which is a hotbed of insurgency. Then we also had the Khalistan insurgency at one point of time. So across India there are multiple conflicts going on, and we are worried that ICC could be misused by other countries to target India. What if false allegations of human rights violations are brought up against Indian forces, right, against the Indian Army and Indian paramilitary forces? So ICC can be misused like that by other countries. So because of that, India has stayed away from the Rome Statute. We haven't signed or ratified it. But India is heavily criticized for this because it is said that India is not upholding its commitment towards human rights and standing up for against war crimes and genocide by not signing and ratifying the Rome Statute. Okay, so this was about the International Criminal Court. Next question. According to the UN clause or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, territorial waters of a country extends to what distance? 200 nautical miles from the contiguous zone, 12 nautical miles from the baseline, 12 to 24 nautical miles from the baseline, or none of the above. See, this convention, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, it was signed in 1982 and came into force in 1994. This basically defines maritime boundaries in the seas and the oceans. It defines different maritime jurisdictions and maritime boundaries. It also defines the rights that coastal states will enjoy within these maritime boundaries. The legal rights, the rights over resource exploitation. These rights are defined through the UN clause. It also provides for dispute settlement. If two or more states have a dispute over their maritime boundaries, over their rights, their legal and resource rights, then they can approach the dispute settlement mechanism that has been set up under the UN clause. For example, the PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, is one of the dispute settlement platforms available under the UN clause. Okay? Through this convention, maritime boundaries have been clearly drawn up. Okay? You have the baseline over here. Baseline is basically an imaginary reference line that hugs the coastline of the country, the coastline of the coastal state. So this becomes the reference line, the reference point. All the water bodies located within the baseline, that is behind the baseline, they become the internal waters of that country. This includes your lakes, your rivers, backwaters, estuaries, deltas, lagoons. They are all part of the country's internal waters. So here, the country will have complete jurisdiction. Just like on land, all the laws, all your legal provisions, your jurisdiction will completely apply in internal waters as well. After the baseline, you measure a distance of 12 nautical miles, and this is your territorial sea. Is that clear? So from the baseline, if you measure a distance of 12 nautical miles, that is the territorial sea, where the country, the coastal state, has full legal and resource rights. All the laws on land are applicable in territorial sea as well, in the territorial waters. Your civil laws, your criminal laws, every law applies here, and jurisdiction can be claimed by the coastal state in the territorial waters. That's why the name territorial waters. So the air above it also belongs to that country. So this water body belongs completely to that country's sovereignty, including the airspace above it. Okay? So in this region, the country can have complete jurisdiction. Next comes the contiguous zone. Contiguous zone is measured from the end of territorial waters for another 12 nautical miles. From where territorial waters end, from there if you measure a distance of another 12 nautical miles, that's when you get the contiguous zone. This marks the beginning of international waters and international airspace. Is that clear? Once you cross territorial waters, you enter international waters and international airspace. In international waters and international airspace, freedom of navigation is a basic fundamental right. Freedom of navigation cannot be disrupted by any country at any cost in international waters. Unless the ship or the aircraft is not threatening the country, unless it's not carrying weapons, unless it's not involved in intelligence or espionage operations, unless it's not polluting or carrying toxic material, right? The movement of these ships and aircrafts cannot be disrupted. Freedom of navigation becomes a fundamental right in international waters and international airspace. In the contiguous zone, a few limited laws of the country will be applicable. For example, laws related to defense, coastal security, pollution, then biodiversity conservation, customs, immigration. Such basic laws will be applicable in the contiguous zone. This is also called the hot pursuit zone because the security forces, they can pursue terrorists, criminals and smugglers in the contiguous zone. It's called the hot pursuit zone because of that. Then UN clause also defines EEZ or exclusive economic zone. This extends for 200 nautical miles from the baseline of the country. So in this range, in this body of water, whatever resources are found, they solely belong to that coastal state. That's why the name exclusive economic zone. The coastal state will have exclusive rights over the coastal marine resources found within the 200 nautical mile range. Be it fisheries, hydrocarbon reserves, any minerals and metals present on the sea floor and the seabed, all these economic resources, they belong exclusively to that coastal state. It also defines the extent of continental shelf, right? So such maritime boundaries are demarcated and delineated through the UN clause. It provides for a rules-based order, provides for settling of maritime boundaries and settling of maritime disputes. So as per the definition of UN clause, option B is the correct answer. Question is asking you as to what is the extent of territorial waters. It extends to 12 nautical miles from the baseline. Option B is the correct answer. Coming to the next question, a very simple, straightforward, factual question. Recently, India has functioned as the chair of which of the following institutions? UN Security Council, WHO's Executive Board, World Bank. The correct answer is 1 and 2 only. Option C is the right answer. We already discussed that recently India held the presidency of the UNSC. We held the chair position, right, for the month of August 2021. Then last year, India was also elected to the WHO's Executive Board. Is that clear? The World Health Assembly was held last year and India became the chair of the WHO. The Executive Board of the WHO takes all the key decisions of the WHO. the policies that have been taken up at the World Health Assembly, they are implemented, they are enforced through the directions of the World Health Organization's Executive Board. The Executive Board plays a key role. It has more than 30 members who are elected, and one country will occupy the chair position on a rotational basis. So last year, India held the chair of the WHO's Executive Board at a crucial time when the world was dealing with the pandemic. That is why the topic is important. Okay? Last year, India chaired the World Health Assembly, which lays down the policy, priorities and guidelines for WHO. The World Health Assembly plays a key role in defining the functioning of the WHO, and India also headed the Executive Board, which implements and enforces the policies and decisions taken at the World Health Assembly. Okay, that's why the topic is important. So 1 and 2 are correct. Option C is the right answer. Moving on to the next question. Which country or countries have recently announced their withdrawal from the Treaty on Open Skies? Is it India, China, or Pakistan, or Russia and China, or USA and Russia? Which is the correct answer? See, the Treaty on Open Skies was brought out post the Cold War. After the Cold War ended in 1991, in 1992, the Treaty on Open Skies was adopted by USA, Russia, and several European countries. Around 34 countries are part of it. Around 34 countries are part of this treaty, at least they were part of this treaty. What is this treaty all about? This treaty allows aerial surveillance to be carried out over the member countries. Countries which are part of the treaty, they can conduct aerial surveillance on other countries which are part of the treaty by using unarmed aircraft. They can use transport aircraft which do not carry weapons, which are unarmed, and they can conduct aerial surveillance on the other members in order to ensure stability in the region. The idea is to prevent wars and conflicts. The idea is to prevent misunderstandings between rival countries. Because when such unarmed aerial surveillance is permitted, right, when it is legally allowed, it will allow the other country to settle any doubts it has in its mind. Let's say Russia fears a US military mobilization. Under the treaty, Russia can take up unarmed aerial surveillance of any country which is part of the group and monitor whether the US is mobilizing its troops and military equipment. Similarly, the US can monitor and carry out surveillance on Russian military movement and troop movement and deployment. This will help in bringing better understanding, better trust in the relationship. It helps avoid misunderstandings and thus prevents conflicts and wars. So this was an important treaty designed towards bringing stability towards the region. Recently, the topic is in news because last year, the United States quit the Treaty on Open Skies. The Donald Trump administration was opposed to the treaty and the US has withdrawn from it. At the start of this year, in January 2021, even Russia has quit the Treaty on Open Skies. Please remember this point. That's why it's important. Both US and Russia have quit the Treaty on Open Skies recently. They quit last year. They announced the decisions. US completed the withdrawal last year itself, and in January 2021, Russia also completed the withdrawal process. So since both countries have withdrawn, it's an important topic which is in news, so you should know what is the Treaty on Open Skies. So the correct answer would be option D, USA and Russia. These are the countries which have recently announced their withdrawal from the Treaty on Open Skies. Coming to the last question for today, we have just a few more questions left. We can take it up in tomorrow's class. I would like to take one more question before we end the session. Build Back Better World, or B3W, is an initiative undertaken by which grouping? Is it by UNDP or G7 or BRICS or UNEP? See, the B3W initiative or the Build Back Better World initiative was recently announced by the G7 grouping. Is that clear? In the month of June, in June 2021, the G7 countries, they held a summit at a place known as Cornwall in the United Kingdom. The G7 summit was recently held a few months back. At this summit, the G7 countries launched a major initiative known as B3W, or Build Back Better World Initiative. This is essentially meant to be an infrastructure initiative which will be taken up around the world by the G7 countries, and it is seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's why the topic is so important. The B3W initiative of G7 is seen as a counter of these countries, the Western countries, against the Belt and Road Initiative of China. Right? China's BRI is an ambitious connectivity project. It's an ambitious infrastructure project which is giving China enormous strategic and economic influence around the world. So G7 countries are catching up and they want to counter Chinese influence, and they have launched a counter initiative known as the B3W. Through this, they seek to develop infrastructure connectivity projects around the world, and they seek to provide the required funding and assistance for these projects. Is that clear? So at this summit, the G7 members even adopted the Cornwall Consensus. At the end of the G7 summit, these countries, the G7 countries, they adopted the Cornwall Consensus. They took many decisions related to global economy, climate change and the others, but the most important decision was related to the B3W initiative. Okay? G7 is also an important grouping for prelims. The members are UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the United States. European Union is also invited every year to participate. It's not a member, but EU also participates in the G7 summits. This grouping was formed in the 1970s in the backdrop of the 1973 oil crisis. In the backdrop of the oil crisis, the global economy was disrupted. So these developed countries came together to synchronize their economic policies in order to protect their economic interests. Okay? Later, Russia was also included in the group, and it had become the G8, the group of 8 advanced countries. But in 2014, Russia was suspended. It was removed from the group, and the G7, they boycotted Russia following its annexation of Crimea. Right? US-Russia tensions started increasing after this. Russia not only annexed Crimea, later it also started meddling in Ukraine, and it sponsored a civil war in Ukraine. So these developments in Crimea and Ukraine led to tensions between the Western countries led by US and Russia. So as the rivalry increased, Russia was thrown out of the group, and G8 again became the G7. But it's still a very significant, very important grouping. It represents 40% of the global GDP, right? Even though the population of these countries is less, it represents a significant percentage of the global GDP because all the countries are developed, advanced economies. That's why the group is important, okay? So these countries have adopted the Cornwall Consensus, and the B3W initiative has been launched by them in order to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. So that is it for today. Let's end the discussion over here. We have a few more questions left. I will take them up tomorrow along with the rest of the topics. So tomorrow would be the last session. We'll again aim to cover at least a good 30 to 40 topics. So in total, in these 3 sessions, we would have covered at least 100 or 120 topics. I hope these discussions are useful for your prelims. I hope you have found them to be helpful. So if you find these initiatives to be useful for your preparation, please like the videos, comment on them, share them with your fellow aspirants, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So thanks for being with me. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.